You know that moment when life decides to stop being a quiet, predictable drama and morphs into a full-blown primetime reality show, complete with a laugh track only you can hear? That was my Tuesday. Not just any Tuesday, mind you, but the one where I discovered my boyfriend, Leo, wasn't just working late. He was apparently moonlighting as a professional heartbreaker, and his latest client was a woman I vaguely recognized from the gym's least used elliptical. And the kicker? I found out while scrolling through a local food blogger's Instagram, admiring a perfectly plated truffle pasta, only to spot Leo's unmistakably large, slightly too hairy hand reaching for a breadstick in the background. Next to him, a blonde, not me, was laughing with a little too much genuine delight. My first thought wasn't heartbreak. It was, seriously, Leo, you couldn't even pick a restaurant with bad lighting? My name is Isabella, and for most of my 30-something years, I've been the human equivalent of a beige wall. Pleasant, blends in, rarely causes a stir. My life was a carefully curated Pinterest board of sensible choices and understated elegance. Leo was supposed to be the splash of muted color, the artisanal cheese to my whole wheat cracker. We had a routine. We had a shared streaming account. We even had a plant that we hadn't managed to kill yet. It wasn't a whirlwind romance, more like a gentle breeze, but it was our gentle breeze. Or so I thought. The photo on Instagram was a slow-motion car crash in my brain. The restaurant, the Gilded Spoon, was one of those trendy, dimly lit places where the portions are tiny, the prices are astronomical, and the ambiance is designed to make you feel sophisticated, even if you're just ordering glorified mac and cheese. Leo, bless his predictable heart, always ordered the same thing: the Wagyu steak, medium rare, with extra truffle fries. And there he was, in the background of a stranger's photo, doing exactly that, with someone who wasn't me. My initial reaction wasn't tears. It was a dry, almost academic observation. So this is how it happens. Not with a bang, but with a breadstick. I zoomed in. The blonde was leaning in, her smile wide. Leo was doing that thing with his eyes where he looked like he was listening intently, but was probably just calculating how many more fries he could sneak. It was a scene so cliché it could have been ripped straight from a bad rom-com, only I was the unsuspecting protagonist who hadn't been informed of the genre change. I felt a strange mix of emotions, a flicker of betrayal, a wave of profound annoyance, and an overwhelming urge to comment on the food blogger's post with a cryptic, "Looks like someone's enjoying their late-night meeting." But I resisted. Barely. My phone felt heavy in my hand. I scrolled through the comments on the post. Such a romantic spot. Food looks divine. Who's the lucky couple? No one knew. No one suspected. It was just another Tuesday night, another perfectly curated Instagram moment, another lie unfolding in plain sight. I felt like a detective who'd just stumbled upon the most obvious clue in history. A clue so glaringly obvious it was almost insulting. It was like finding a note that read, "I'm cheating on you," and I left the evidence in the cookie jar. And then finding the cookie jar. The absurdity of it all hit me like a rogue wave. Here I was, meticulously planning our weekend getaway to a quaint B&B, debating between lavender-scented bath bombs and artisanal cheeses for our picnic basket, while Leo was out there, apparently auditioning for a role in Scenes from a Marriage, the prequel. My life, which I thought was a tasteful indie film, had just been hijacked by a direct-to-streaming melodrama, and I, Isabella, the woman who color-coded her spice rack, was now starring in it. Without even being asked, I put my phone down, slowly. The silence in my apartment, usually comforting, now felt like a vast echoing chamber of my own naivete. I looked around, the throw pillows I'd spent an hour arranging, the half-finished puzzle on the coffee table, the plant, still stubbornly alive. All of it felt like props in a play I hadn't realized I was performing in. And the audience? Just me, apparently, watching my own life unravel with a morbid fascination. "Well," I muttered to the plant, which remained stoically indifferent, "this is certainly a plot twist." And here I thought my biggest problem today would be deciding between oat milk and almond milk for my latte. The thought of confronting Leo, of the inevitable tears and denials, and the theatrical performance he would undoubtedly put on, filled me with a weary dread. It wasn't the pain of a broken heart that bothered me most. Not yet. It was the sheer inconvenience of it all, the disruption to my perfectly organized life, the mental energy I would have to expend on something so utterly, predictably messy. I picked up my phone again, not to stalk Leo, but to find the address of the Gilded Spoon. If he was going to turn my life into a spectacle, the least I could do was make sure I had a front row seat. Or, better yet, a leading role in the grand finale. The thought, a tiny, mischievous spark, began to glow in the back of my mind. The beige wall was about to get a very loud, very sarcastic coat of paint. And maybe, just maybe, I'd finally get to use those artisanal cheeses after all. Just not with Leo. The days following the Gilded Spoon incident were a masterclass in passive-aggressive performance art. Leo, oblivious as a brick wall in a hurricane, continued his charade of the devoted, slightly too busy boyfriend. He'd text me, "Good morning, sunshine," with an enthusiasm that now felt like a cruel cosmic joke. He'd ask about my day, feigning interest while I described the mundane details of my remote work, knowing full well he was probably mentally replaying his truffle pasta date. I'd respond with a saccharine sweetness that would have made a diabetic wince, adding subtle, almost imperceptible jabs. Oh, my day was fine, Leo. Just fine. Not nearly as exciting as some people's evenings, I imagine. He'd just grunt, "That's good, babe," completely missing the subtext that was screaming louder than a siren. It was like trying to explain quantum physics to a goldfish. My internal monologue, however, was a stand-up comedy routine in progress. Every interaction with Leo was fodder for new material. When he'd complain about being tired from long meetings, I'd think, yes, I'm sure meeting her lips for 3 hours straight is exhausting. When he'd casually mention a new restaurant he wanted to try, I'd mentally add, "Oh, is that where you're taking your next conquest? Or are we sticking with the Gilded Spoon for now? It seems to be working out well for you." The bitterness was there, sure, but it was coated in so many layers of irony and sarcasm that it almost tasted like a dark chocolate dessert. The real humiliation wasn't just the betrayal itself, but the sheer, unadulterated predictability of it. It was like watching a bad magician pull a rabbit out of a hat, knowing full well the rabbit was already hidden there. I wasn't just made a fool of. I was made a fool of by someone who clearly thought I was too dim-witted to notice. And that, dear reader, was the unforgivable sin. I was made a fool of, I mused to my reflection one morning, and I thought the family clown was my perpetually unemployed cousin, Barry. My family, bless their well-meaning but utterly useless hearts, were no help. My mother, upon hearing me vaguely hint at relationship issues, immediately launched into a monologue about how I needed to be more understanding and men are just different, dear. My sister, always the pragmatist, suggested I just move on. There are plenty of fish in the sea. None of them, not one, asked if I was okay, or if I needed to vent, or if I wanted to burn Leo's belongings in a ritualistic bonfire. It was always about my reaction, never about his transgression. It was as if I was the one who had committed the cardinal sin of existing while being cheated on. "Oh, Isabella, you're so sensitive," my mother would sigh, as if my emotional response to betrayal was akin to being allergic to gluten. I wanted to scream, "No, Mom, I'm not sensitive. I'm just not a doormat with a pleasant smile." Instead, I'd just nod, offering a tight-lipped smile that probably looked more like I was experiencing a mild stroke. It was a familiar dance. Me, trying to articulate a genuine hurt. Them, immediately invalidating it with platitudes and unsolicited advice. It was a microaggression marathon, and I was perpetually losing. The gaslighting was subtle, insidious. Leo would occasionally mention how stressed he was at work, implying that his late nights and distant behavior were a result of professional pressure, not personal infidelity. "You know, Isabella, sometimes I feel like you don't understand the demands of my job," he'd say, with a weary sigh that was clearly rehearsed. And I, the naive Isabella of yesteryear, might have bought it. But the new, improved, slightly more cynical Isabella just thought, "Oh, I understand perfectly, Leo. Your job is to juggle two women, and you're clearly not getting paid enough for that kind of overtime." I started seeing the world through a new, darkly humorous lens. Every couple I saw holding hands, every romantic comedy on TV, every saccharine love song on the radio became a target for my internal mockery. Look at them, I'd think, watching a couple cooing over a puppy in the park, so blissfully unaware that one of them is probably already planning their escape route to a secret rendezvous. It was a coping mechanism, I knew. If I didn't laugh, I'd probably just curl up into a ball and weep for a week. And frankly, I had too many important things to do, like deciding what flavor of ice cream would best accompany my newfound cynicism. The other woman, whose name I still didn't know but mentally referred to as the truffle pasta enthusiast, became a character in my evolving narrative. I imagined her, probably perfectly coiffed, probably with a laugh that tinkled like wind chimes, completely unaware that she was a co-star in my tragicomedy. I wondered if Leo told her about me. Probably not. He was the type to compartmentalize his lies like he compartmentalized his laundry, neatly and with a distinct lack of care for what was happening in the other basket. The thought of being replaced, of being the old model traded in for a newer, shinier version, was initially a sting, but then it morphed into something else, a perverse sense of amusement. Oh, so I'm the iPhone 8, and she's the iPhone 15 Pro Max, huh? I'd muse. Well, at least the iPhone 8 still works, has better battery life, and doesn't require a constant software update to function. It was a ridiculous comparison, but it made me chuckle. And in that moment, the sting lessened. This wasn't just about Leo anymore. It was about the entire ecosystem of subtle betrayals and dismissals I'd experienced, not just from him, but from others who claimed to care. It was about being invisible, then being seen only when it was convenient for someone else's narrative. But now, the narrative was shifting, and I, Isabella, the beige wall, was about to become a very brightly painted, very sarcastic mural. And I had a feeling the paint was going to be a rather shocking shade of red. The decision to pivot from sad girl with a broken heart to strategic mastermind with a vendetta and a killer sense of humor happened somewhere between my third pint of artisanal ice cream and my fifth rewatch of a particularly satisfying revenge movie. I realized that wallowing was not only unproductive, it was also terribly boring. My life was already a farce. Why not lean into it and make it a memorable one? My plan wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my narrative with a generous side of public humiliation for Leo. And perhaps a small, perfectly executed dose for the truffle pasta enthusiast. My first step was research. Not the stalking exes on social media kind of research, but the uncovering the truth with a dash of Sherlock Holmes flair kind. I needed to identify the blonde. A quick dive into the food blogger's tagged photos led me to her profile. Her name was Chloe, and oh, what a profile it was. Pictures of perfectly manicured nails holding designer handbags, selfies with a filter that made her skin look like porcelain, and an alarming number of photos of her dog dressed in tiny sweaters. She had a husband, too, prominently featured in a few photos, looking exactly like the kind of man who'd be too busy at his important job to notice his wife was dining with other people's boyfriends. His name was David. He had a kind face, a slightly receding hairline, and a penchant for golf. Bingo. My plan was so discreet, so elegantly simple, that even a professional spy agency would take notes. Between their organic kale smoothies, I wasn't going to confront Leo. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to orchestrate a public unveiling so subtly devastating it would make a Shakespearean tragedy look like a puppet show. And it would all happen at the Gilded Spoon, of course. Because if you're going to be cliché, you might as well go all in. The irony of the situation was not lost on me. Here I was, meticulously planning a strategic ambush, while Leo was probably still congratulating himself on his masterful deception. He thought he was so clever, so sneaky. It was like watching a toddler try to hide a cookie behind his back. Adorable, but utterly transparent. Oh, Leo, I'd think, a wry smile playing on my lips. You underestimate me. I may be a beige wall, but I'm a beige wall with a very sophisticated surveillance system. My next move was to get in touch with David. This required a delicate touch. I couldn't just cold call him and say, "Hey, your wife's cheating on you with my boyfriend. Want to meet for coffee?" That would be too direct, too messy, and frankly, too boring. I needed to be subtle, a whisper in the wind that turns into a hurricane. I found his professional profile on a networking site. He was an architect. Perfect. I crafted an email, ostensibly about a potential collaboration for a fictional interior design project. I complimented his work, expressed admiration for his firm, and subtly suggested a casual dinner meeting to discuss the possibilities. I chose the Gilded Spoon for the proposed meeting, citing its excellent ambiance for creative discussions. The universe, it seemed, was on my side, or at least enjoying the show. The waiting game was agonizing, but also thrilling. Every day I'd check my inbox, a tiny thrill of anticipation fluttering in my stomach. Would he respond? Would he fall for it? Would he see through my thinly veiled ruse? I imagined him, a busy professional, probably skimming emails, and hoped my carefully chosen keywords, innovative, bespoke, synergy, would catch his eye. And then, it happened. A reply. "Ms. Isabella, thank you for reaching out. I'm intrigued by your proposal. The Gilded Spoon sounds lovely. How about next Tuesday at 7 p.m.? A triumphant, silent cheer erupted in my living room. I practically skipped around the apartment. "Yes," I whispered to the plant, which still looked unimpressed. "The pieces are falling into place." The sheer audacity of it, the delicious irony of inviting the other woman's husband to the very scene of the crime, was almost too perfect. It was like a meticulously planned heist, only instead of diamonds, I was after public humiliation and a satisfying dose of schadenfreude. The next step was to ensure Leo would be there. This was the easiest part. Leo, being a creature of habit and a connoisseur of predictable infidelity, had a standing Tuesday night work dinner with Chloe. He'd even mentioned it casually to me a few days prior. "Oh, babe, I've got a big client dinner Tuesday, probably be super late." I just smiled sweetly and said, "Oh, that's too bad. I was hoping we could finally watch that documentary about competitive dog grooming." He'd mumbled something about important business, completely missing the twinkle in my eye. I spent the next few days perfecting my outfit, my makeup, and my poker face. I wanted to look effortlessly chic, like someone who was completely unbothered by the impending chaos. I practiced my casual, "oh, what a coincidence" expression in the mirror. I rehearsed my polite, slightly amused smile. I even practiced my, "I'm so sorry, I must have mistaken you for someone else" line, just in case. This wasn't just a dinner, it was a performance. And I was determined to win an Oscar for Best Actress in a tragicomic revenge plot. The night before, I felt a strange mix of nerves and exhilaration. It was like the calm before a storm, or perhaps the calm before a particularly satisfying explosion. I thought about all the times I had felt small, unseen, unheard, all the times I had been compared, dismissed, or taken for granted. This wasn't just about Leo and Chloe. It was about every single moment I had allowed myself to be less than I was. And now, I was ready to unleash the full, sarcastic, utterly unbeige force of Isabella. The stage was set, the players were in position, and the curtain was about to rise on the most deliciously awkward dinner party of the century. Tuesday night arrived with the dramatic flair of a villain's entrance in a poorly written play. I arrived at the Gilded Spoon precisely at 6:55 p.m., looking like I'd just stepped out of a fashion magazine, not a carefully constructed revenge plot. My dress was a sleek, confident black, my hair was perfectly coiffed, and my smile was as serene as a Buddhist monk's, if that monk was secretly planning to unleash a torrent of passive-aggressive chaos. I surveyed the room, my heart doing a little tango of anticipation. The restaurant was buzzing, a symphony of clinking glasses and hushed conversations, and there, in a cozy booth in the corner, was Leo and Chloe, right on schedule, my little pigeons, nesting in their illicit love nest. My reservation was for 7 p.m. David, bless his punctual heart, arrived at 6:58 p.m. He looked exactly like his profile picture. Kind, a little tired, and completely unsuspecting. I greeted him with a warm, professional smile, extending my hand. "David, so lovely to finally meet you. Isabella." He shook my hand, his grip firm. "Isabella, a pleasure. Thanks for suggesting this place. It's quite nice." "Oh, it was nice, all right. Just wait until the main course." The hostess led us to our table, which, by a stroke of pure, unadulterated genius, and a very generous tip to the maitre d', was strategically located directly across from Leo and Chloe's booth. Not too close to be obvious, but close enough for perfect sightlines. As we settled into our seats, I made sure to position myself so that Leo would have a clear view of me. David, meanwhile, was already engrossed in the menu, completely oblivious to the impending fireworks. "So, David," I began, my voice clear and calm, "I was just saying what a lovely ambiance this place has. Very intimate." I glanced subtly towards Leo and Chloe, who were now deep in conversation, their heads close together. Leo was doing his charming man laugh, a sound that usually made my teeth ache. David chuckled. "Yes, it's a popular spot. My wife and I come here occasionally." Oh, the irony. I almost choked on my water. "Oh, really?" I said, feigning surprise. "What a coincidence. I've heard wonderful things about their truffle pasta." I saw Leo's head snap up from his conversation. His eyes, usually so dull, widened in a cartoonish display of shock. He saw me, and then he saw David. His face, usually a picture of bland contentment, went through a rapid series of color changes, from pale to crimson to a sickly shade of green. It was like watching a chameleon having an existential crisis. Chloe, still oblivious, was mid-sentence, probably describing her dog's latest fashion accessory. And then I told him, "Fido, darling, tweed is so last season," she trilled. Leo, however, was frozen, his fork halfway to his mouth, a single truffle fry suspended in mid-air like a culinary hostage. He looked like he'd just seen a ghost, or perhaps a very angry tax auditor. "Leo?" Chloe prompted, noticing his sudden silence. "Are you all right, darling? You look like you've seen a—" She followed his gaze. Her eyes, which had been sparkling with self-importance, now went wide with a dawning horror. She saw me. She saw David. And then, she saw the full, glorious tableau of her life crumbling before her eyes, set to the background music of a soft jazz quartet. I gave Leo a small, polite wave, as if we were merely acquaintances who'd bumped into each other at the grocery store. "Leo! What a surprise!" I said, my voice dripping with an almost theatrical innocence. "And Chloe, isn't it? From the gym." Chloe's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. She looked from Leo to me to David, who was now looking up, confused by the sudden silence. "Is everything all right, honey?" David asked Chloe, his brow furrowed. "You look a little flushed." Chloe stammered, "David, what are you doing here?" Her voice was a strangled whisper. I interjected smoothly, "Oh, David and I are just having a business dinner. We're discussing a potential collaboration. Isn't that right, David?" I gave him a dazzling smile. David, still bewildered, nodded slowly. "Yes, that's right. Isabella's an interior designer." Leo, finally finding his voice, croaked, "Isabella? What are you doing here?" His voice was barely a whisper, laced with pure terror. It was the sound of a man realizing he'd walked directly into a very elegant, very public trap. "Oh, just enjoying the ambiance, Leo," I replied, taking a delicate sip of my water. "And the company, of course. David here is an absolute delight." I gave David another radiant smile, which he returned, still utterly clueless, but clearly enjoying the attention. The silence that followed was so thick you could cut it with a butter knife. Chloe, recovering slightly, shot daggers at Leo. "Leo, who is this?" she demanded, her voice rising in pitch. Leo, looking like a deer caught in headlights, stammered, "Chloe, this is Isabella, my girlfriend." He practically choked on the word. David's head snapped towards Chloe, then back to Leo, then to me. His kind face slowly morphed into a mask of disbelief, then dawning horror, then a quiet, simmering rage. "Your girlfriend?" he repeated, his voice dangerously low. Chloe, what is going on? Chloe, realizing the jig was up, burst into a torrent of incoherent excuses, something about misunderstandings and just friends. Leo, meanwhile, looked like he was about to spontaneously combust. He started to sweat. A lot. I leaned forward, a picture of calm, enjoying every agonizing second. Oh, it's not a misunderstanding, Chloe, I said, my voice sweet as poison. It's a rather clear understanding, wouldn't you say? Especially since Leo here has been telling me he's been working late on big client projects every Tuesday night. Apparently, those projects involve truffle pasta and, well, you. David slowly pushed his chair back, his eyes fixed on Chloe. Is this true, Chloe? He asked, his voice devoid of emotion, which somehow made it even more terrifying. Chloe, now openly weeping, mumbled something about being confused. Leo, meanwhile, was trying to melt into the booth cushions. He looked utterly pathetic. I can explain, Isabella, he whined, his voice a desperate plea. Oh, I'm sure you can, Leo, I said, a cool smile on my face. But I think David here deserves to hear it first. After all, he's the one who was planning to spend the rest of his life with someone who apparently prefers dining with other people's significant others. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Waiters paused. Diners pretended not to stare, but their ears were clearly perked. It was a scene straight out of a reality TV show, and I was loving every minute of it. Never imagined a dinner reservation could leave so many grown men pale, and no one was given to the arts. Justice, it seemed, was best served with a side of public humiliation and a perfectly chilled glass of Chardonnay. The aftermath of the Gilded Spoon Gala was, predictably, a glorious mess. Chloe and David had a very public, very loud, and very satisfying argument right there in the middle of the restaurant, culminating in Chloe storming out in a flurry of designer handbag and tear-streaked mascara. David, after a moment of stunned silence, turned to me, his face a mixture of shock and gratitude. Isabella, he said, I don't know what to say. Thank you. I just shrugged, a picture of understated heroism. Just doing my civic duty, David. Someone had to clarify the seating arrangements. Leo, meanwhile, tried to slink away, but I wasn't done with him. Oh, Leo, I called out, just loud enough for a few tables to hear. Don't forget your wallet. You left it on the table. Wouldn't want you to be late for your next client meeting. He snatched it, his face a mask of utter mortification, and practically ran out the door. It was a truly beautiful sight. David and I, surprisingly, stayed for dinner. We ordered the truffle pasta. It was delicious. We talked for hours, not about the betrayal, but about life, about work, about the absurdity of human relationships. He was a genuinely nice man, and I found myself feeling a strange sense of camaraderie with him. We were two unwitting participants in a shared tragedy, now bonded by a mutual public humiliation of our respective partners. It was a bizarre, but oddly comforting connection. In the days that followed, the ripple effects were predictably entertaining. Leo tried to call, to text, to explain. I blocked him on everything. He even showed up at my apartment once looking disheveled and desperate. I simply opened the door, handed him a box of his remaining belongings, mostly socks and a very questionable collection of graphic tees, and said, "Thanks for stopping by, Leo. But my beige wall is officially closed for renovations. No more bland boyfriends allowed." He just stared, defeated. It was a small victory, but oh so sweet. Chloe, I heard through the grapevine, aka the gym gossip mill, was having a rough time. Her perfectly curated social media presence had gone silent. Her dog, Fido, was probably in therapy. And David? He filed for divorce. He even sent me a thank you note, along with a gift certificate to a local spa. For helping me see clearly, it read. I chuckled. My work here was done. My life, post-Leo, was surprisingly lighter. It was like shedding a heavy, ill-fitting coat. I realized how much energy I had spent on being easygoing, on not making a fuss, on being the invisible girlfriend who never rocked the boat. And for what? So someone else could rock my boat with a mistress and a side of truffle fries? No, thank you. I started saying no more often. No to bland coffee. No to boring dates. No to people who didn't appreciate my particular brand of sarcastic charm. I redecorated my apartment, adding splashes of vibrant color where beige once reigned. I even bought a new plant, a ridiculously flamboyant orchid, just to prove a point to the old stoic one. The experience taught me a valuable lesson, albeit a cynical one. People will underestimate you, especially if you're quiet and unassuming. They'll assume your silence is weakness, your patience is naivete. But sometimes the quiet ones are just biding their time, gathering material for their next darkly comedic masterpiece. I didn't become bitter. I became sharper. My humor, always a little dark, now had an extra edge, honed by the ridiculousness of my own life. I still go to the Gilded Spoon sometimes, usually with friends. I always order the truffle pasta, and I always make a mental toast to Leo and Chloe, the unwitting muses of my personal renaissance. It's a reminder that even the most painful experiences can be transmuted into something else, a good story, a sharp joke, a newfound sense of self. And as for family, well, I've redefined that term. It's not just blood or shared last names, or even shared streaming accounts. It's the people who don't laugh at your face, only at the perfectly crafted, utterly absurd joke you've become. And sometimes that's all the family you need.